it's one of the ones in St. Joseph, Missouri. That's all I'll say. Anyway, so moving on. Because Jeff was the first one to kind of hit me to the idea that the whole ergot thing is heavily debated these days. And even reading online, like depending on what you read, you'll get different takes on it. Some absolutely like support the idea that there was ergot poisoning, which led to delusions, which led to the women on the floor. Jeff is of the opinion that there didn't need to be ergot. You're dealing with young and teenage girls with nothing to do. And it's not like that teenage influence to rebel is new. That's been a thing for centuries. And he thinks, honestly, it began with them messing around and then it got beyond them. And there was no way they could go to puritanical preacher dad and go, just kidding. Ah, so funny. And so they were committed.
Yeah. So, you mean, for people who are not familiar, the prevailing natural grain in and around Salem is rye. And let me just tell you that I am grateful for modern conveniences because not a fan of rye bread, not my thing. But rye is the prevailing grain and ergot is a fungus that grows on it. And it can it sort of mutate once in a while. And ergotamine is faintly familiar to like LSD, more like some of the psychedelics like mushrooms or that sort of thing. And so there are theories that say that, you know, the settlers may have ingested this and been impacted by it. But the thing is, some of the effects of ergotamine poisoning, they would have affected more infants. It would have affected more elders. And instead, the people that showed the hallucinations, the seizures, the possessions, as they were claimed to have had, were all in the prime of their lives, as healthy as they could be. So it's iffy. Like, it's possible. I don't dare speak in absolutes about anything pretty much here, but it's iffy that ergotamine played anything more than maybe an initial, you know, maybe one of the girls got sick. Maybe they decided, well, we didn't want to admit that she ate too much bread, and so we're going to blame it on witchcraft. Like, I could buy that, but for sure, those who have this opinion that everybody ingested ergotamine and everybody was experiencing this, the accusers, everybody, like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah, that's what, and that was sort of Jeff's thing, was that he's like, he really thinks it's basically Mean Girls set in the late 1600s.
Well, with money.
I'm talking just to start, because once it goes, it sort of evolves and becomes its own thing. But basically, to kick it off, he thinks it's effectively Mean Girls, the 1692 edition, and then the hysteria that builds on top of it feeds itself, and the girls really didn't have much to do at that point. So, I mean, I guess at some point they could have come out and went, ha ha, kidding. But nobody would have listened, because like Tituba recanted her confession and nobody listened. It was barely noted in the court documents. So let's talk about the time period of the witch trials, because some of this is very important. Okay, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is what Salem was a part of at the time, it was 17th century life. There's a lot of stresses. And I mean, from farming, which there were no modern farming methods at the time were, scythes, basically. It's that time that Eddie Izzard talks about, when people were like, scythes were like, well, look at Mr. Digital over there with the scythe. Well, it's just a scythe. but I mean, that was like high tech for the farming industry at that time, which means it was a lot of backbreaking labor, a lot of time in the fields. Like, you didn't play very much if you were a farmer around these times. And illnesses were common, and medicine had not advanced very much by 1692, believe it or not. Also, these people had a strong belief in the devil, so strong that it was just naturally agreed to that he was there and he walked the earth and he would fool you if he could. Like, they believe that, like I believe in science. Like, Neil deGrasse Tyson talking science to me, I believe that. And they would believe that the devil could come in the village and say hi. Also, the Salem village families had rivalries with each other. Plus, there was a rivalry between Salem Village and Salem Town. So that comes into play. And just before this, there was a smallpox epidemic. So they were tired anyway, tired and upset, and they'd lost people, and some people had made it through, but not everybody. And then the indigenous tribes in their area were often at war with one another, and often included the people of Salem because they happened to be close. Also, maybe the Salemites were a bit rude to the indigenous people. I don't know it for sure.
Oh, for sure, we were colonizers. Absolutely, yeah.
But I strongly suspect. So that's sort of what was what the people believed in. And without all of those things, the hysteria over this might not have got to the point that it did. But you're dealing with a situation where these are simple people with a deep belief in that Satan exists, and that they're surrounded by these circumstances that just, they're ready to believe anything negative at that point. It's so that's the time period that this all happened in. That's the mindset of these people, and that's the world that they lived in. So how does it start? Well, in January of 1692, 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris, also known as Betty Parris, and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, who are the daughter of Samuel Parris and the niece of Samuel Parris, who is the minister of Salem Village. They began having fits, including violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts of screaming. After a local doctor, William Griggs, diagnosed bewitchment, other young girls in the community began to exhibit similar symptoms, including Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Walcott, and Mary Warren. In late February, arrest warrants were issued for the Parris's Caribbean slave, Tituba, which, calling her their Caribbean slave is a bit, I don't know, demeaning, because she wasn't actually from the Caribbean, but whatever. Along with 2 other women, homeless beggars Sarah Good and the poor elderly Sarah Osborne, whom the girls accused of bewitching them. Now, so in June, the Special Court of Oyer, which means to hear, and Terminer, which means to decide, sat in Salem to hear the cases of witchcraft. Now, this is not a normal court. This court can accept something called spectral evidence, which basically what spectral evidence is if you were on trial, Krista, let's say you were on trial for being, I don't know, weird, right? And so they're talking to you, and you point at someone in the crowd, and they go, and they fall over. They're like, Krista caused that by pointing at this person. That's spectral evidence.
Hello. I will kill you.
That's spectral evidence, and it will get you killed.
Oh, cool.
Because what they were doing was a kind way to determine if someone was a witch. And I say that because up to that point, they were doing fun things like throw her in the water. If she swims, she's a witch. If she drowns, she's not. So there's no winning for losing on that one. Or hey, like light them on fire. If they don't burn, they're a witch. If they do, oops. These were the common witch tests. Or one of my favorites was the witch mark, right? Supposedly it was a mark put on you by Satan, and if they put a pin in it, you didn't feel it, you're a witch. And I can't imagine that this was ever performed at all. Like,
that was part of the examinations for the Salem trials. There
I
were
know.
some
I can't
testing of the witch
all that someone
marks.
didn't go, ow, hey, that hurts. And I just have to imagine that the person doing it would just ignore it. Well, she didn't say anything.
Well, no, but if they would do it, they would blindfold them, for instance, and or they would find, like, it's birthmarks, it's moles, it's whatever, which often don't have nerve endings. They often legitimately don't hurt. So if you're blindfolded or turned away, you can't see when you're being jabbed with a pin, so you don't know how to time the ow, hey, stop.
Okay. See, things I didn't know. But yeah, so the trial was a nominally nicer way to go, but in reality, it really wasn't. It's just the examination itself was not likely to kill you, which up to that point, witchcraft trials were kind of short. Oh, she wasn't a witch, but now she's dead. All right, well, let's go have lunch. So this was a unique court, and it was presided over by Chief Justice William Stoughton. The court was made up of magistrates and jurors. The first to be tried was Bridget Bishop of Salem, who was found guilty and was hanged on June 10th. 13 women and 5 men from all stations of life followed her to the gallows on 3 successive hanging days before the court was disbanded by Governor William Phipps in October of that year. And if you look at Phipps's decision, he doesn't say it, but the overwhelming thing I got was Phipps was like kind of embarrassed by this and was like, just stop. We'll send you a good judge. Just stop. And so the Superior Court of Judicature, formed to replace the Witchcraft Court, did not allow spectral evidence. This belief in the power of the accused to use their invisible shapes or specters to torture their victims had sealed the fates of those tried by the Court of Oyer and Terminer. The new court released those awaiting trial and pardoned those awaiting execution. In effect, the Salem witch trials were over the minute they got a real court in there. As years passed, apologies were offered and restitution was made to the victims' families. Historians and sociologists have examined this most complex episode in our history so that we may understand the issues of the era and view subsequent events with heightened awareness. The parallels between the Salem witch trials and more modern examples of witch hunting, like the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s, are remarkable. So that's the overview. But just saying that's the overview, there's a lot to unpack in that. Let's start with Tituba. First of all, not much is known about Tituba's life, but what we do know is that she was born in an Arawak village in South America, where she was captured during her childhood and taken to Barbados as a slave, which is why I say calling her a Caribbean slave is kind of rude, because while a lot of the literature describes her as black or half-breed, she was not. She was an indigenous person to South America, which to my mind means like cream colored or maybe mocha, not what I would think of as traditional black. But
she failed the paper bag test before they had paper bags, is the answer.
I'm sorry, what? I've never heard of this paper bag test.
Yeah, you hold the paper bag next to your face, and if you are lighter than the paper bag, you will likely safely drive your car and not be shot on the sidewalk by a neighbor, for instance, and so on. And if you are darker than a paper bag, then it is not necessarily safe to be out in public after dark in America.
Okay.
If you read the book Genesis Begins Again, you'll figure this out when the book goes on. Because the grandma in that book holds the bag up to her father's head. in order to test that kind of stuff.
Wow. So anyway, Tituba does not get treated well. She gets treated a little better in history than she did then, but she does not get treated well.